Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to go over some basics as far as editing is concerned and really controlling vertices and edges and faces when you're working with models, specifically really oriented towards video games, but really this works in any way, shape, or form or for any end result that you desire, like an animation or something like that. This is really just basic modeling 101 kind of stuff. So I'm just going to take my cube here. Let's lift it up a little bit here. And I'm going to go into edit mode. All right, you can use the tab key as well. And you'll see that I've got basically, simple cube. And the way that objects are, just as a review for some of you, this is a review. For others, this might be brand new. But every 3D object, essentially, when it's made of a mesh, okay, which is most of the 3D objects, especially that you're going to deal with in video game design. But the objects are basically built out of three major, or man, I shouldn't say major pieces. They're like atoms, like the most basic pieces of the object are the following three things. You have a point, which is, or a vertice, okay, which is literally a single point in space. So they call it a vertice. Sometimes I'll call them points just because that's what they are, but it's a vertice. And then you have a line that is drawn between 2 points is called an edge. So you have an edge, that's a line that's drawn between 2 points. And then, which of course both of those two things are essentially two-dimensional. Because they lay flat in a plane. Now they may not lay flat, in the axes that we have. So for instance, right now, these 2 points are both, along the same axis. They're going along the x-axis. You could also argue that they're flat along the y-axis. And they're different across the x-axis. So you could argue that they're not two-dimensional because they're going in, they're changing position in the x-axis, but really it's a two-dimensional shape. It's just a line. Even if I take this and I move this vertice up to create a diagonal line here between the two, you're still really talking about only a two-dimensional shape. If I were to go and delete all of the other vertices that are existing in this object, you can see it's a two-dimensional shape. It's not a three-dimensional shape. So both vertices and edges are two-dimensional shapes. That's it. Where we get our three-dimensional shape from is the addition of faces. Now that's actually not completely true as I say that, of course. If I were to subtract one of these vertices from my selection and then delete all the rest of the vertices, you could argue that these are three-dimensional now. But in actuality, that's not true, because if I just took a two-dimensional plane and placed it vertically, it would encompass all three vertices. So we don't really even have a three-dimensional shape quite yet. We also don't have anything of any real substance. We don't have an object yet. We just have points and edges. So in order to actually have a three-dimensional object, the first thing we need to start with is a face. And so a face is basically the skin, if you will, that's drawn when you have an enclosed two-dimensional shape. So here I have this two-dimensional shape, which is basically a square, and I have a skin basically that is drawn in between those 4 points. You can have a skin that only has 3 points. We call those quads and tris. So a face that has 4 points is a quad, and a face that has 3 points is a tri. So I'll show you. I'm just going to merge these. And you can see here now I've created a really funky shape. Doesn't like that. But we're just really worried about this top face here is a tri now. So it's essentially, it's a face. It's skin that is drawn essentially between 3 vertices and 3 edges. If I go back and undo, now we've got a skin that is drawn between 4 vertices and 4 edges. When you're editing objects for games especially, you have to have a maximum of 4 vertices per face. Blender will let you do that. Blender will let you, or will let you have more. Blender will let you have more vertices per face, but that doesn't end up texturing well. When you start doing UV unwrapping and all sorts of other problems, if you have more than 4 vertices per face, then the UV texturing and the UV unwrapping does not go well. And Unity or other game engines don't really like that very much either. Sometimes I've gotten away with it. Sometimes I'll find that I had a face that had 5 or 6 vertices and I get away with it. Usually I don't, though. Usually I don't get away with it. So it's really important to kind of understand what you're trying to do and understand that basic rule, that you need 3 or 4 vertices per face. Okay, so that's just kind of first things first right there. So one of the things that you can do when you're editing an object, and again this may be review, but I'm just going to cover this really quickly as well, you can switch the modes by which you select certain pieces of your object. So in this instance, I'm actually in vertices select mode. And I can essentially select an edge by holding the Shift key down on my keyboard, and now I've selected 2 vertices. And therefore also kind of sort of selected the edge that makes up those, or that is drawn between those 2 vertices. I can change that up here. So I can go to edge select mode, and now I can select an edge. And in some ways you're doing that without selecting the vertices, which is kind of cool, and different things can happen as we go along with that kind of an idea as we get a little further. And then I can also select entire faces. And again, now I'm selecting the mesh in between. The way that I like to view this is just kind of like a pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid is selecting a face. And when you select a face, you get the face, you get all the edges, and you get all the vertices. If you go and select an edge, okay, now I've got the edge and I've got all the vertices that might be along that edge, but I don't necessarily have the face. If I then select vertices, that's like at the tippy top of the triangle, then I can select individual vertices and not select edges. The problem is, and that helps a lot, and you can delete certain individual things too. The problem with this is that they're all interconnected. So which one to choose really depends on your workflow. It depends on how experienced you are. It depends on what you want to do to edit. If I just want to make this shape a little wider in that area, well then it's obvious. I just want to grab only that vertice. If I just want to grab 2 of these and move this over again like that, then you know what, I won't bother switching the edge mode because it takes just as long to do that as it just does to hit Shift click. But then there are other moments where I really will try and grab an edge, especially when I'm trying to grab like a loop cut around like a cross section. So for instance, let's put a loop cut here. So I've got a loop cut right there. Let's just say I haven't selected it yet. Now with vertices select mode, I can just alt click into there. I could also do that with edge select. It doesn't really matter as long as you know that keystroke. But if you don't know that keystroke, which is alt and click, it would be easier to select all 4 of these with the edge selector on rather than with the vertices selector. So if I had the vertices selector, in order to do this, I'm going to have to hold Shift click and move around, okay, and I'm just going to have to do that. And it's a little harder. Whereas with the edge selector, it's almost the exact same thing. Whoops, I'm holding the Windows, not the Shift key. Oh. Okay, so that was supposed to look easier, but because I was holding the wrong key down on the keyboard, it actually looked harder, but you'll just have to go with it. And now I can do something like scaling it down. So I could take the scale tool, and I could just scale those down and create an object, okay? Now, let's say I actually wanted instead to do something like, did it again. So Alt-A deselects everything. Let's say I wanted to create another rectangle coming out of this one, and I wanted it to be pretty even on its sides. So one of the things that I might do I mean, one of the first things I'd probably do is I'd probably start setting my mirror modifier on there, but I'm not going to go into mirror modifying with this particular tutorial. But the mirror modifier makes things a lot easier. But either way, I would take my, I could stay on Vertices Selector, and I'm going to take my loop cuts, which are right here. I'm just going to hit Control R, and I'm just going to create a couple loop cuts. Now, you might ask, why'd you create so many loop cuts? Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to take these 4 faces here, and I wanted to extrude them out. Now, the way I used to do this is kind of funny because I didn't really understand, is I would then go to face select mode, and then I would hit E to extrude, and Y to make sure, well, no, Y to make sure that it was going along that axis. And there we go. Now, what I used to do is I would actually use to delete that vertex in the middle. Because I thought that when you did that, you created another face on top of this one and that the face stayed in the middle. And if memory serves me right, when I started working with Blender, it actually did that. So, for instance, what do I mean by that? Let's do that again. So I'm going to take these 4 faces. Nope. Okay. I'm going to hit E to extrude. And then if I can, I'm going to fly the camera inside the object, and you can see inside the object we don't have faces anymore right here along this side of the object where it used to be, because Blender's gotten smart, and when you select face mode and you extrude them out like that, it deletes the vertices that used to be right here. If my memory serves me correctly, in the older versions of Blender, it didn't do that, and I would have a whole nother set of meshes here that I would have to then get rid of, because you don't want an interior mesh like that when you're trying to do UV textures. It just, you don't know what it is, and it creates all sorts of UV unwrapping issues and all sorts of stuff like that. So now if I wanted to take these, and let's say I wanted to create like a point from this, well, then I can start to work on how I work with my vertices. And you might grab them and bring them down, and a lot of it just depended on how many steps you wanted and what you might want to do. So for instance, I could take all the vertices here. Actually, I could Alt-click. Nah, it doesn't work. With the Shift key, now I've got all the vertices selected. Then I can hit the M key, or Alt-M in older versions of Blender, like 2.7.9, but 2.8 and above, it's M, and then I can just merge them into center. And there we go. That makes a nice, even, straight point. If I wanted to make it more gradual, I could do a loop cut here, and the problem is, notice it won't loop cut. And the reason why it won't loop cut is because you're going from faces that are four faces to a face that has 3 vertices. So actually what's better is you got to think a little bit ahead. So if I know that I wanted to make it a little bit rounder, I'm just going to undo, and then I can hit Control R, once, and then I'll go and I'll grab these vertices, and I will merge them together. Now, some of you who know Blender a little bit more, might be saying, why are you sitting there clicking on all of them? Well, that's a good question. There's a much easier way of selecting things. If you're here and you've got the select box, you can select things like this. But you've got to be really careful. See, if I'm doing all of these and I've accidentally grabbed this vertex here. Now, it's actually really easy just to shift click on it again, and now I've got those. Another thing that I like to do is hit the C button, and that gets me the circle selector. And now I can paint vertices, and right click to get out of that tool, and now I can hit M and I can put it at the center, and you can kind of see how this is already starting to look better. Then what I might do is select my 4 corners, okay, and I might hit S to scale and bring that in, and you can see how it's now making a much nicer and more gradual change between the vertices, and it's starting to look at least a little bit better. The surface topology is definitely something that's more predictable. So anyway, you can also delete different things too, to create holes or to create other sorts of things. So for instance, if let's say I wanted to bring this and send it back inside like a cylinder inside, what I would do here is I would just X and I would delete the vertice. And that rips basically a hole here, and then I can Alt click and that creates or selects the vertices around that cross section, and then I can hit E to extrude and S to scale, and then I can hit E to extrude again, and then once it does this, it can start doing some funky stuff. So then I hit Y to kind of like constrain it, and if I can't see what I'm doing, I'll go up to the Z axis and then I'll go to my wireframe mode. Now there's some really easy keystrokes for that. So let me go back to this. So if you want to go up to your top axis really fast, on your keyboard you hit the 7 key on the numpad. If you don't have a numpad, then you have to set the simulation numpad up in the preferences. But here I can hit the 7 key on the numpad. It snaps me to my center view. And then if I want to go from solid to wireframe, I can hit the Z key on my keyboard, and it gives me kind of this navigational rendering choices selector, which is really kind of cool. And then I can go over, and if I held the button down, I hover this direction, as soon as I let go, it does what I want it to. If I just tap the Z key, then it waits for me to select one of them. So what happens is you can end up getting really fast by just holding the Z key down just a little bit. And now it's going to render. Okay. And so it allows me to just move a little faster. So what I can do now is just go back to my move tool, and get this here, and now you can see how deep that little core cylinder goes that I just did. And now I need to kind of finish it off, because if I'm not careful, I'll just have this open hole here. So then I would hit E to extrude, S to scale, bring it down, and then I would do that one more time, E, S, bring it down, M, merge at center. And now they all kind of merge into one point there at the end. Does that, I mean, hopefully that makes sense. I was just about to ask if it made sense and then realized that there's nobody here to actually answer me back. No, it doesn't make sense, Weisbrod, like I usually do in my classes. So a couple of little things, what I might do also about this is I might take these, so these vertices here, you know, and just make them a little smaller to curve this. So hit S, and you can kind of see how that works. And now if I wanted it to look a little bigger, I might Alt click all the way around it and then hit S and then enlarge them all at the same time, just to kind of create a better look. If you have 2 points selected like this, when you hit the S key, it will scale the distance between them and the specific axis that they are opposing each other in, which is actually really cool. So if I wanted to symmetrically scale that up, I should have done these 4 together and then hit S, and now you can see it scales around a center point just like that to kind of create a much better look. Now let's just say I wanted to delete this row of vertices here and that row there. One of the things that you could do, I mean, easily I could hit Alt and Shift, and then now I've got them and I can delete them, and then Alt and Shift, and then Shift, and so on and so forth. That's one thing. But what I could also do is go to my Y-axis. So go directly on my Y-axis from the front, okay? And then I can use the circle selector again. So I can hit C and I can paint my circle selector. Now if I go too far, like I just did like that, I can middle click to subtract. Now there's a problem with this though. It shouldn't have worked. Notice it did not get the inner cross section there with those vertices. So what I'm going to do is go back, to my Y-axis here like this, and then I'm going to switch to wireframe mode. Now an interesting thing happens with the circle selector in wireframe mode. So now I'm just going to grab this and select all of those, And you know what? I realized I just did too much, which is fine. I always go back to solid mode and check what I have selected, and sure enough, I've selected too much. But if you look in wireframe mode, what happens is the circle selector actually works through the faces. So it's like the faces weren't even there, which is honestly, that is such a cool feature of that. So all I need to do is hit Shift and Alt and select in between two vertices, and now that whole cross section is unselected or deselected, unselected, deselected, and now I can hit X and delete my vertices. Oh no! See now, so interesting. So this is a good lesson. So what I didn't do is I didn't check the back. And so when the circle selector is going through the mesh, you also always have to swivel 360 degrees around your object to make sure that you didn't accidentally select other vertices, which I did. Easy to change. I'll take my circle selector in solid mode now, and then using the middle click button, I'll middle click and drag, and that deletes that. Now I have to make sure that I'm in solid mode for that, because if I'm not careful, let's go back to wireframe, if I middle click, you'll notice that it deselects everything in the inside that I actually wanted to keep selected. So it just takes a little while getting used to like some of these features and functions and what you can do. Now one of the other things you can do is you can delete a face without deleting an edge. So let's just take a look at that really quickly, and then we'll finish this up. So like let's say I have a section up here that I want to delete to create a hole to add a new extrusion or something like that. So I don't know why I would want to do that with this object, but that doesn't matter. So you can also delete faces and you can delete points. So let's just go over how some of that works. So like let's say if I highlighted this and I hit, and it doesn't matter what I selected them with, okay, this still works. So if I selected them with the face select mode, it doesn't really matter. When I hit X, I have a whole lot of options here. We'll start at the bottom. If I hit, well, the bottom of this top section, I'm not going to do the others. If I hit only faces, it just gets rid of the face that was there. If, whoops, thought I was hitting Control Z. If I hit only edges and faces, you'll see it deletes the edges that were there, okay, and the face that was in the middle. And because it deleted the edge that went around that square, it also had to get rid of the faces that were in the adjoining rectangular areas or the adjoining faces there. Okay, so then I can just say delete the face, which is in this instance the same as deleting only faces, but not always. Sometimes that will destroy topology and things around it as well, but for now that's fine. Then, if I delete the edges, we have the same issue where it deletes the face and the edge. Now, if I only had an edge selected, let's just select one of these edges, and I delete that edge. Now you'll notice how that works a little differently. So the only reason why that was the same as when I said edges and faces was because an entire face was selected. If you haven't selected an entire face, then it might not actually work out to be the same. And then, if I have all four of them selected again, and I delete the vertices, you'll see how that destroys almost the entire top. And the reason for that is because it's destroying these four vertices, whereas when I deleted only the edges, it kept those four corner vertices, but had to delete the faces in certain areas. But these faces here in the corners, those ones survived because their vertices weren't deleted. If you had deleted the vertices, then all of a sudden that face is not going to survive because you've removed those vertices. If you do that, so let's just delete that. We can reconstruct things with a simple extrusion process. So if I wanted to reconstruct it, what I would probably do is I would grab my edge here, I would hit 7 and snap to the top, and then I can hit E to extrude. Let's do it from an angle so you can see what you're doing, and then I'll line it up using the top view. So I hit E to extrude and Y to kind of keep that along my axis. And then what I want to do is I need to match up my vertices here. And that's really important. Whenever you're adding edges or vertices to an object, you always want to match up your edges and your vertices so that you're creating another quad or another face with at least 3 vertices with a maximum of 4. So why is that important? Because I think some people might have tried to go here like this. Now something interesting will happen. So here, if I were then to take this and go along that and hit F to fill, notice Blender allows me to create a face that has 5 vertices. And you might think, oh, that's great. That makes my life so much easier. Now I don't have to do as much to get that filled. But that's not really true, because you will pay for this later when you try to UV unwrap. Or probably. In my experience, anytime you have vertices or faces that have more than 5 vertices, or 5 or more vertices, you end up paying for it. You end up paying for that so bad when you do your UV unwrapping and your texturing. So really the proper thing to do here is to take these two like this, and I'm going to line it up equal to the vertices down here. Now, you can get as precise as you want. Okay? Hold the Shift key down, allows you to move slower, and then match that up. If the surface is flat, like this one is, then having it a little further forward wouldn't make much difference. But it theoretically could, depending upon the object, so we won't do that. So now what I'm going to end up doing is I've selected all 4 of those, and I hit the F key to fill. Now you can fill things, you know, by selecting them, and kind of like with, so what I did here is notice that I had 4 vertices, but I don't have that final edge. I didn't actually add the edge. If you just do that, it'll add the edge for you, which is a nice little shortcut. When I first started using Blender, I thought I had to have all the edges, so I would select these 2, then I'd hit F, it would draw the edge for me, and then I would go and select the other 2 and hit fill. Well, the nice thing is Blender doesn't require that you do that. You can just have all 4 of them selected, and even though that last edge isn't there, it'll add it. You can only do that really with one edge not being finished. At least as far as I know, I haven't really been able to see how, you know, any more than that. So now comes an interesting part of this process. How do I extrude these 3 faces or 3 edges over to this? You can make a really big mistake really easily right here. Okay, really easily. And that is this. Select all 6 vertices. I can't count, that's 4. Hit E to extrude and hit Y. Oops, I didn't want those selected. Okay, so I hit E to extrude and Y, and I bring them forward. And you might think, that's really great. There you go, you're done, right? No. And the reason why you're not done is because you've now layered 2 vertices on top of each other. And it might look good, but what's a real problem here is now your model is not what we call manifold. In other words, if I go in here and I grab that vertice, I can tear them apart, and what you see is you've actually got 2 edges here and here, and they're not connected. These vertices are different. And this means your model's not manifold. And what that means is, that means it won't hold water inside it, which is actually really important, especially when you're doing models that you're going to UV unwrap. I mean, you can get away with it sometimes, but you want a model that has a manifold situation. So how do you fix that? Well, there's 2 things. One, you can merge the vertices again. So I can shift click on both of them, merge at the last one. There we go. And then I'll tear this one out and shift click, merge at the last one. Or if I knew that ahead of time, okay, I just take these and I don't select these outer 2 vertices. I just do the middle one. Snap to my top. E to extrude, Y to keep it intact. Zoom in, get it nice and lined up. hold the shift key down to make my motions a little bit more precise. And now I can roll back here. And then what I will do is I'll just fill in these remaining vertices. So I select those vertices, hit F to fill. I'm sure that there's people who would say, you know what, merging them is easier. I don't know. I guess I can't really disagree with that. It's about the same. But I like to not make a mess and then have to clean it up, because then the problem is, what if you don't clean it up, or you don't clean it up right? So I prefer to think a few steps ahead and not make a mess. So now I've got this. I hit F to fill. F to fill. So there's all sorts of things that you can do with your models when you need to that will ask you to like fill, delete vertices, refill them, do all sorts of funky stuff. You can really do some really cool shapes if you understand how to delete certain things at certain times. So sometimes you delete a vertice, sometimes you delete an edge, sometimes you delete a face, and then sometimes you need to extrude edges or faces or vertices themselves too, and then you need to start filling things in. You need to start filling in your faces so that you actually have a skin that's over top of your object. Because one of the really important things is if you have an object in a video game, and let's say you've got a hole like this, so I've just only edges or only faces. So now I've got this kind of hole in here. When we're modeling, Blender shows us both sides of the face, but that doesn't happen if you go to a gaming engine. When you texture objects in the gaming engine, it only puts the texture on one side of the face. The other side ends up being transparent. So this is, and it gets weird. So if I was looking at it this way, like this, I would see the outer surfaces here, but then that inner portion would be completely transparent, like a piece of glass. It's like one-way glass, like one-way mirror, right? So I would see all of this, and then this whole section in the middle, completely transparent. So I would actually see what was in the background. And it's kind of frustrating. Not kind of, it's a lot frustrating. So you always want to make sure that your objects have the normals in every place that they need to. If you need to create a hole like this because you're doing an indent, then that's totally fine, but you want to extrude it out. Now, part of the problem is if I just extrude down, I'm still giving myself a problem here. So if I just hit E to extrude and drag that down, the problem is these vertices here, this is a mesh that's now overlapping the mesh that's on the outside. So I've got a mesh on the inside and a mesh on the outside. That doesn't work very well. In fact, a lot of times you get this kind of like crisscrossy, shimmery look that happens when you have two meshes that are occupying the same space, or two faces that are occupying the same space. So in order to do that right, what you really need to do is you need to create a new cross section. So I'll do a loop cut, I'll bring it over here, and I'll create a nice thin wall there. And then before I do my extrusion, I will shift click on all four of these, hit the F key, and now I can extrude along the Z axis, bring that down, and this mesh or this face here is not lying right on top of that mesh there, and you won't get that weird shimmery effect. And now to close it off, because still I have my same problem. If I'm looking down through here, this is all going to be transparent. I'm going to see straight through it, through the floor, or see the floor, through the floor of the object itself, and see whatever's below it. So then all I need to do is hit F. And now I've got this nice indent here that creates a nice look. And if I wanted to do another one here, again, I might have the same problem. So if I do this, and I were to X delete my faces, and then use my edges, and do this, and try to extrude down like that, I'm going to have the same problem. Now I've got a face that's here. And is literally, and you can see how it's shimmering and it's got that kind of weird patterned look. That's because these two faces literally occupy the same space, but that's actually two separate things. So if I wanted to do this, what I really needed to do is, again, leverage the power of my loop cuts. So I would loop cut, and I would probably bring one over here like this, and I would loop cut, and I would bring one over here like this. Okay. Go to my vertices select mode here to make it a little easier on myself, and shift click on those 4 vertices, fill that, and now I've got like a little buffer space, a little wall between that, and I can extrude. Oh, and I would want to do that here just in prep for maybe doing the same thing over there. And then I would grab my 4 vertices and I would E to extrude, Z to make it go down. And now if I wanted to match the height with the other one, again, that's kind of where I would do this. I would switch to one of my views that's flat on, go to my wireframe mode, and now I can line it up. Depending upon what you're doing, like if I'm making something for 3D printing, that might not be precise enough. F to fill. If I'm doing something for a video game, then whatever visually looks like it's the same depth would probably be completely okay. So let's just say that all of a sudden I realized that I wanted to make these 2 little chambers into one. Well, pretty easy actually. And this is the last thing I'll show you. So I would take this edge, I would go and I would delete only the edge in the face. I would do the same thing, only the edge in the face. And so now I've kept the vertices and I can now refill. So I go here, boom, 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 and I refill. Another option, I suppose, would be to merge those vertices, but then the problem is you have to really merge all the way down. So unless you have a really good reason for doing that, I would just recommend refilling the faces. Done, F to fill. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of kind of a viewpoint of how to work with vertices, edges, and faces in a little bit more of an advanced way. Again, I'm really only using deleting, loop cuts, and extrusion. Like those 3 things really are the basis for the 3D modeling process, at least as far as I use it. I don't go and do modeling or sculpting a lot and that sort of stuff. So this is really the way that I model the most. There are, of course, a lot of other things you can do, beveling and all that sort of stuff, which does come into play when you start making more, complicated models. But you can bevel manually with loop cuts, right? So it's, it's maybe a little easier, but those things, okay, the loop cuts, the extrusions, and then, deleting edges, faces, or vertices and understanding how that works, those are the basics for modeling, 3D modeling like this when you're modeling with vertices, edges, and faces. So I hope that's given you a little bit of a better sense, of the basics of modeling and how you can make a weird shape like this. I wasn't planning on this shape in any way, shape, or form. I didn't practice this beforehand. I just started with a cube and started making something, and I don't even know what it is. But at the same time, hopefully you kind of see this and it'll help you a little bit. So yeah, have a good night.